Hello, welcome to Reel Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm pleased to have with me on the show once again Jason Aguayo. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hello, Angela.
And Jason is back for our ongoing segment looking at female filmmakers called She Directs. And this time we are profiling the director Martha Coolidge, who was born in 1946 and is still going. Still alive and going, and we're going to be looking at four of her major features today. But I always like to give this part to Jason to talk a little bit about, number one, why you were interested, Jason, in profiling Martha Coolidge, and maybe you could give just a brief history about her as a filmmaker, because I know you do a lot of research on the directors for this segment.
Yes, so I was not aware of Martha Coolidge until reviewing Real Genius after the passing of Val Kilmer, and it seems strange to me that this college movie was directed by a woman because at that time college movies usually meant something else. So that got me kind of on the path, and discovering some of her early films were pretty impactful. We're going to talk about one of those here. But yeah, I guess I just appreciated she navigated a lot of different genres and seemed to be able to work in various environments, independent, big studio, deal with actors, and kind of navigate some of the problems. There were some problem productions that she came onto and helped see them through to the end. So very professional and diverse in her skills. So really got interested. As you said, born 46 in Connecticut. Her father was lieutenant governor of the state, so she came from a prominent family, actually a distant cousin of Calvin Coolidge, but ended up going to Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, illustration, and then became the first film major at that school. Eventually, she would go to the NYU Tisch School of Arts for film, and did her first couple of documentary type stuff in New York before catching some attention and moving to LA. But yeah, I guess I've come to know her pretty well and appreciate the things that she's brought to film, and looking forward to talking about Martha Coolidge.
Yeah, she definitely has a pretty. These four films are what I would say about them is they're all pretty different. So her like a through line, like sometimes you look for auteurs, you think about like when we did the Catherine Bigelow episode. Catherine Bigelow definitely has a style. Like she hasn't, I don't, as far as I know, has never done a rom-com, whereas Martha Coolidge started in documentaries, actually, some of her earliest films, like documentary shorts. And so I'll kick it off with our first film here today, which is Not a Pretty Picture from 1976. I had never seen this film, and it's on Criterion Channel, and was pretty excited to check this one out because it's way different than her later films. It's a docudrama, actually. So this is sort of her transition from pure documentaries that she made very early in her career to a narrative feature that's a narrative feature but with documentary aspects. It's actually a recreation of her own experience of being raped by an acquaintance when she was 16 years old in 1962. And the film focuses on that experience as well as the aftermath. The reason it's called a docudrama, and this is a very interesting kind of hybrid format she does here. It's sort of like recreations, which I know people don't usually like in documentaries, but it's not your typical recreation because Martha Coolidge herself is in the scenes talking to the actors about the process. And so it kind of explores the process of making a film about the subject of rape, while also, as an audience member, you see some of the quote unquote narrative feature aspects, but then you'll see Martha Coolidge as the director and writer talking with the cast about, well, what does this scene mean? how are we going to explore this? And it's very improvised, almost in like a Cassavetes style, where they're trying different things. Like in one scene, when they're going through the actual rape scene, the actor who is playing the rapist, Curly, is the character's name. Jim is the actor. Jim is uncomfortable as they're trying to do different things, and he's saying like, okay, well, I'm afraid I'm going to hurt her, or is it's going to be too aggressive? I'm getting frustrated. And then the actress playing Martha, and her character's name is Martha in the movie. It is revealed at some point that the actress herself was also raped when she was in high school, and making the movie is, bringing up some of these kind of memories with her. So I was riveted. I thought this was a really terrific movie. I can see why it's gained notoriety over the years. Not notoriety in a bad way, but gained prestige. I think when it first came out, it was a little art house movie, and it came out and it did impress people, impress Francis Ford Coppola enough that he asked her to join American Zoetrope, his production company, which we'll talk about in a bit. But now, in recent years, it's gotten really good attention. It's been restored, given a full restoration, and put out on Criterion Collection on Blu-ray. And I think one of the reasons is that it's still extremely relevant. I mean, there's some dated things you might think of dated, as the actor is talking about some of his viewpoints of rape, and you could say that's maybe a little bit dated, but it's really not in a way. I mean, this is still an experience women go through all the time. I think it's something like 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted in the U.S. So, I mean, it's not like the issue's gone away. So I'm curious to hear what you think about it, Jason.
Well, I agree on all points. I think it went beyond film, not only the narrative piece and the filmmaking part. I mean, it's almost like you can see the acting class and where they're getting motivation, how they're navigating. But the fact that they, both the director and the actress had these personal experiences, it makes it, just so impactful in real world. And yeah, like you said, I mean, maybe a little bit, we've progressed a tiny bit in terms of our societal, I guess, being a male and having grown up in the 80s where some of these other films came from. I can totally relate to some of those attitudes, and we've come a little bit, but not very far. I think it's super critical and eye-opening. I almost should be required watch for teens these days. But yeah, I think it was huge, and glad to see that it's getting some attention. Like you said, it was originally on 16 millimeter, showing in art houses and stuff, but got the restoration, and so it is available out there. So I would highly recommend it, certainly for film and beyond.
Yeah, and I like what you said about it being required viewing. I actually said to my partner, I said, I think this should be required, like every high school or maybe even middle school at this point, but eighth grade and up, maybe a student should be required to watch this as part of like sex ed or health class or something, because it really causes a conversation. There's some extras on Criterion with this movie. There's an interview that Martha Coolidge does with Allison Anders, another really important female filmmaker, and they're talking about when it first screened. Martha Coolidge said when it first showed in theaters, people would just be kind of quiet when it was over and shuffle out of the theater. And then when it was re-released and restored in 2022, and they started screening it again, and they had a big showing of it at MoMA in New York, and there was a full audience for it, and there was huge discussion about it. People were excited to talk about it, but also a lot of women in the audience were just like, this was just like my experience in high school. Like there were so many, I mean, it was just, it really prompted a lot of conversation. And I think it is a conversation starter. We ended up talking about it for almost an hour after we watched it. So there's a lot to dig into here. I mean, obviously not the most pleasant movie, but I also think she did some really important things in not making it a feature film. It doesn't kind of glorify or sex up the rape scene, because, and in fact most of the actual scene where they're even practicing the rape scene, the camera kind of swivels and actually is focused on Martha's reaction watching the actors, and so it doesn't make it glorified or titillating in any way, if you will. So
Certainly true, and it made me feel uncomfortable, and I like, when is she going to say cut? It's like I didn't have as much patience as she did for letting those scenes go on. But
Well, and I was
certainly,
worried about the actress. I was knowing because they show at the beginning her talking about it. And then when they're doing it and she's watching the scene and that she doesn't say cut and it keeps going and going. And I was like you, I was very uncomfortable. My husband was very uncomfortable. And then at some point, I'm like, I'm going. The actress has got to be. This has got to be traumatic for her in some way to be like reliving this experience. Even though this wasn't her experience, it was similar enough. So yeah, really important filmmaking, great restoration. It looks terrific. So high recommendation on this one. I think, in my opinion, this is the best film she ever made. I wish she'd kind of kept in this direction. She went, as we'll talk about, when she joined Zoetrope, Francis Ford Coppola's production company. She went in a much more commercial direction with her filmmaking. So
right. So I guess of mention were a couple of the documentaries that were very personal for her. One about her brother, David Off and On, More Than a School, 73, and also Old Fashioned Woman, which was basically a biography of her grandmother, which was pretty charming. But Not a Pretty Picture came out, and like you said, got some attention. She went to work with uh, Coppola, but doesn't produce any films. The one that she worked on seems to have never been released. This is The City Girl, so it
mm,
never actually got out there. So I would be really interested in seeing that film. It premiered at a film festival years later, but it never got a regular release. But she did get the chance to do Valley Girl, 1983, and so that's what we're talking about. Totally changing directions in terms of this little independent. Valley Girl was still independent, but commercial thing about young people, and it is a rom com, allusions to Romeo and Juliet kind of story, but it's about Randy, who is a city punk in L.A., and Julie, who is a Valley Girl, and how their chance meeting leads to a romance, and they're kind of fighting their own people as far as nobody's really in support of their relationship. This was, a cultural phenomenon. I remember this as a kid, and I think the whole Valley Girl thing. There's a lot of great music in this movie, and a lot of good acting from people who didn't have a lot of experience. The big note, of course, is the chance from Nicolas Cage making a splash. And, the story goes that he was using Cage instead of Coppola, and Martha Coolidge didn't know who he was and hired him on his performance only. And that seemed to really give him the confidence to keep going with acting. But I think he does a great job. Both of the principals do, and there's a lot of great support and great music, a lot of fun. But yeah, totally different direction than
yeah.
the picture.
Yeah, this film was really famous. It was, I'm a little bit too young to have seen it like when it came out, but I saw it on video later, and my sisters definitely, they were like 80s teens. I mean, a little bit later 80s, but still, like, it was very influential. And you would hear, like, I only knew about Valley Girl language because of this movie, because obviously I didn't grow up in Southern California. I grew up in Phoenix, and people didn't talk like this. But it started that whole thing of like, gag me with a mixing spoon, and like, oh my gosh, totally. And, that whole Valley Girl language. And it's like, oh gosh, I saw it when I was young, and then so I hadn't rewatched it in years. So it was interesting rewatching it now for many reasons. Like, one of the reasons that is really kind of laughable is Nicolas Cage's quote unquote punk character is about the most straight laced punk I've ever seen in my life. He wears khaki pants. Like, a real punk would not be caught dead in khaki pants.
Well, and the
He's
thing is, none of the music is actually punk.
No,
He's
none of
supposed to
it.
be a
It's
punk, but
mostly new wave. Even the
yeah,
stuff he's in the bar scenes when they go to the divey bar that he hangs out at, it's more like kind of Springsteen-esque rock, sort of. The band that's playing, it's kind of like it's a rock band, but it's not punk music at all. I mean, it's not what I would associate with punk, that's for sure. So, especially if you compare it to something like Decline of the Western Civilization, like a real punk movie. But and he's not exactly very dangerous looking compared to a punk who came in with his face covered in tattoos and piercings and crazy
I
and a
know. I think
mohawk.
he's a punk in name only, but he really is more of new wave.
Right, right. But like, yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I found charming this time around as an adult watching the movie is the parents. Julie's parents are these kind of, so there's a reason she's kind of even among the Valley people a little bit of an outcast, because the Valley people are like, you know, the Valley was known for being like pretty suburban, pretty straight laced, pretty yuppie, basically. And like her parents are hippies who own a natural foods restaurant that serves like vegan food, which now isn't that weird, but in 1983, that'd be like, whoa, you're weird, you know. And her parents are cool. They're like, they're kind of the just kind of tell her to go with their heart. They're not kind of pushing her in either direction, and her parents play more of a role than I remembered. Probably when I was young, I just totally ignored the parents and just thought about how hot Nicolas Cage was in this period. But because it made Nicolas Cage a big star. Nobody else really. I mean, the girl that's in it, I think she was in some other movies, but Nicolas Cage really kind of popped off from this movie. It made him a big star, and so, and I think for good reason. When he compared to the other guys in particular, like he really stands out. You're like, oh, this guy's interesting. He's just interesting to look at, and so it's fun. But man, is it different than her last film? So.
I guess just speaking on a couple of things. One, it was filmed in LA. I actually went to college with a couple of people that went to some of these schools, Harvard
Oh,
High, which is where they filmed The Prom. So I have a friend or two that went there. And yeah, Nicolas Cage making the splash. Oh, I wanted to say for the parents, Frederick Forrest and Colleen Camp, they kind of came from Zoetrope. Both of them were in Apocalypse Now and did a number of Coppola films, as well as Colleen Camp especially did a bunch of Martha Coolidge.
so you are from Southern California, so you actually knew people like this, sort of.
I think my recollection is more of a cultural phenomenon. I don't
Mm.
know. Maybe I think I probably knew people, but was totally unaware of that speak. I was just a dumb kid who was knocking around and trying to go to the beach. But yeah, I think the preppy kind of preppy is sort of similar along those lines. I guess the coining of the Valley Girl obviously comes from Frank Zappa and his song with his daughter, and there was actually a lawsuit against this movie. But yeah, I think it was a phenomenon that was going on, and this movie was what
Oh, there
put
was a
it.
lawsuit against this movie. What was that for? I didn't know about that.
Well, I think because he had a song, Zappa had a song, and so
Mm.
I don't trying to stop the production. Like he had considered making a movie, felt that he had some copyright on the term, but it was not successful
Mm.
stopping it. And
Interesting.
uh, a lot of great music, and I think this was right about the time that really new people started having to pay for music in their movies. They couldn't just use it, and so like there's a great album, but that was really delayed in coming out, and some of the later versions of the Blu-ray and stuff, they swap out some of the songs from the
Oh,
original
really?
production because there were a lot of cool songs in there. Some of them, are specific to that area, but certainly like the "I'll Melt with You," that's one that's permeated through our culture. But
Yeah, that
certainly,
was a huge hit. Yeah.
one other thing, I totally opposite of what Not a Pretty Picture is. She apparently was contracted to do 4 well-lit frontal nudity shots in the movie. Like that was, a requirement of hers. So I guess one of the challenges I think is navigating this area, this film, and then Real Genius. That era of teen and college comedies were pretty raunchy, and she's navigating this thing, giving some soul to them without really selling out, but having to comply with the system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's ridiculous. And that was very common for 80s teen movies, but they're sort of forced feeling a little bit in this movie. That is something that sort of made me. And there's also there's the scene where the girls have the slumber party and they're all just hanging out in their underwear. And I turned to my husband, I said, I went to slumber parties when I was in high school and college. Never did I just sit around in my underwear with a bunch of girls. Like the eating the chips, like they were shoving chips in their face. That part definitely happy. Talking about boys and eating chips, but like that's just not a thing. That's the thing guys put into movies. But I'm sure she had to I'm sure Martha Coolidge was like, well, they want TNA in this movie, so I gotta give it to them a little bit, But that made me laugh. So anyway, so we'll move
But a
on.
fun watch. Definitely
Yeah,
recommend.
it's fun. Yeah.
Right. So she also did Saved Joy of Sex. Apparently, Penny Marshall was supposed to direct, but Martha Coolidge did that. Real Genius was a big splash. Again, at college, but not the raunchy thing. Did some Paradise TV movies, Trenchcoat in Paradise and Rare Essentials. That's through the 80s. But then in 91, did Rambling Rose, and so that's our next film. Um, let's see, this is more of a period piece based on a novel, and she's got several movies that were based on novels, but this is about Rose, who comes strolling into a family in the South, and basically is hired on as a servant, but the perspective of everyone, especially the young son and the father, is that she was this bright light that brought a lot of vibrancy into their life, and they're sort of reflecting on this past. So it's told from the perspective of John Hurd, who is the grown son, and he kind of remembers in flashback this happening. But Lucas Haas plays the younger version. He does another movie with Martha Coolidge later. And Diane Ladd, this is the second time that Martha Coolidge directs Diane Ladd. And then, of course, Robert Duvall plays the father of the family. And this is probably, pretty picture, not a pretty picture, definitely got some recognition, but not really awards like Ramblin' Rose did. This got a lot of recognition, not only for Martha Coolidge, but also for the actors. Some challenging, I think, content in this movie, but for the most part, I found it pretty enjoyable. What did you think?
Yeah, I like this movie. I've seen it several times. I think it's really terrific on a lot of levels. It is problematic. I mean, the Laura Dern character is highly sexualized, right? And I mean, she's sexualized both by everyone that looks at her, but she also views herself merely, I think, in a way, only as a sexual object. So it's an interesting screenplay in that way. And so the Robert Duvall character, the patriarch of the family, is super inappropriate with her, but also trying to, they kind of treat her like this wild animal that needs to be like somehow kept down for her own good. And maybe in some of those cases it is, because she does have a tendency to just go off with boys and let them do whatever they want to her, right? So, and then Diane Ladd, of course, who is Laura Dern's mother in real life, plays the matriarch in the family, and was, the one that won, I think, the most awards from this movie, if I'm not mistaken. She was nominated for an Academy Award. Oh, Dern was nominated, and Ladd was also nominated. So they were the first mother-daughter duo to ever be nominated for Academy Awards in the same year for the same film. But yeah, it's got great atmosphere. This is the kind of film where you thought, well, why didn't Martha Coolidge make more films that looked this good? Because it's set in Georgia during the Great Depression. It just looks pretty terrific. It is also interesting that she started her career writing her own stuff, like in Not a Pretty Picture. But then once she got into the studio system, most of these movies have other people's screenplays, and so maybe she just decided she was more of a director than a writer. I don't know, but I think it's very interesting because it's like a male writer from a very male perspective in that way. And I think what she tries to bring to the film, Martha Coolidge brings, is tries to give some more layers than maybe was in the screenplay to the Laura Dern character, because her character is so sexualized. So
Yeah, the idea that that's the only way she knows how to earn love, and so
right.
it certainly was insightful to hear Martha Coolidge talk about this. And I guess one of the thing that really stuck it to me is, like, I floated through this movie the first time, not really knowing what the objective point message was, and then when Laura Dern has to go in and see the doctor, and they're faced with this decision, and the two parents differ on the path forward. And I guess that was a little bit shocking to me, not to spoil anything, but like, oh, okay, so this is I mean, it was so much about autonomy and the society pressure on women and controlling their lives. It really opened it up for me, that portion of the movie.
Yeah, pretty. I think it's her second best film after Not a Pretty Picture, which I hadn't seen. I'd seen Rambling Rose before we did this episode, and I always thought maybe that was her best film. And then when I saw Not a Pretty Picture, I'm like, oh no, that's her best film. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so very interesting. So, go ahead.
But
You want to talk about after this?
yeah, I guess the thing is, it was well received, but didn't do that well commercially. She did a bunch of other movies after that: Crazy in Love, TV. Lost in Yonkers is a Neil Simon play that had Mercedes Ruehl and Richard Dreyfuss in it. Angie, Gina Davis, and James Gandolfini. Three Wishes. This is a Patrick Swayze kind of fantasy. Out to Sea is sort of the post grumpy old men with Lemon and Mathau, and then introducing Dorothy Dandridge. I know this wasn't a feature film, a theatrical film, but it was pretty impactful. Um, uh, Covering the life of Dorothy Dandridge, and Halle Berry, got a bunch of awards and then would go on to her Oscar. A bunch of TV stuff. I would recommend her Ponder Heart if you want a little bit more period. But eventually she gets to, and this is her final film, I'll Find You. And this, I guess, is your intro.
Yeah, interesting. Big gap here, 2018. I mean, she did a lot of stuff in between, but she hasn't made a film since I'll Find You, which is a period piece set in 1939 in Poland. Follows Robert, a Catholic opera singer, and Rachel, a Jewish violin virtuoso, who are in love. And they dream of performing at Carnegie Hall one day. They're attracted to each other, but they feel like because of their differing faiths, they can't be together. Then the Nazis arrive. As we always know, when something's set in 1939 in Europe, that's what's going to happen next. The Nazis arrive and screw everything up, and they become separated. And the movie then kind of tracks Robert trying to find her again. She's put in a concentration camp along with her whole family. He tries to find her and kind of searches the world for her. I didn't love this movie. It has a nice little look to it. I didn't know any of the actors. It seems maybe low budget for the kind of movie it is in terms of like a period piece. It has some nice music, but it felt, particularly for a World War II movie, which I've seen a lot of, it felt like the stakes were low in a weird way. Like it just felt like it felt a little flat for me. I wasn't sure if it was the romance part of it or the Holocaust part, but it just felt like I've seen so many Holocaust era movies, I guess, that compared to those, it felt like a TV movie version of a Holocaust movie.
Well, I definitely feel that just from the look of it. And I guess some of the challenges, this wasn't a Hollywood movie. She went over to Europe and hired Europeans. So I think this is one of the challenges. She talked about having a sync problem, or the whole thing was out of sync. And so they had to go redo and edit, and they ran into the pandemic. Um, uh, Explaining the gap, she did have a pretty serious horse accident, like around 2016. And then the pandemic, of course, delayed this production. Um, but I enjoyed it. I can get where you are coming from, although I have heard people say that historically it's pretty accurate in terms of the machines and the costume and everything. And it's probably a much lower budget than most Hollywood productions. Certainly things of that sort of nature. Stellan Skarsgård, probably the most well-known actor in this, and I'd
And
like
he's
him.
quite good. He stood out.
Well, and his character, like the end of his character, was the part that got. And I guess I picked up on what I think is a piece of opera that was in Carmen, which, of course, Carmen Jones was the opera that Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte got in. So there were some strings in terms of the classical music for works, but definitely enjoyed that. She's talked about wanting to do sci-fi or western or something like that, but I haven't. Like you said, there isn't anything since this movie. She is 80 this year, and I actually attempted to contact her.
Oh,
Did not get a response. Her production company website is no longer working, so I'm not sure what the prospects are for films from Martha Coolidge, but I definitely enjoyed what we've seen.
well, that wraps us up for this episode. Thank you, Jason, for bringing this. I'm really glad to have seen Not a Pretty Picture. I definitely will tell people from now on that that's essential viewing. As always, have a great day and great movies. Thanks for watching. And Brad said we can do the after party, which is, if you've seen the show here recently, Jason, we do an after party for just the YouTube version of the show. So here is the Real Film Snobs after party, where Jason and I will continue to talk about Martha Coolidge for as long as we feel like, which will probably just be a minute or two. But I'm curious, like in your research about her, you said that you tried to contact her, which is really interesting. But I just do think it's interesting she didn't direct again after this film. But it also felt like she struggled, like a lot of female filmmakers. I think she struggled to get films made. I mean, it just seemed
Yeah,
like that was kind of a constant in her career
yeah,
from what
yeah.
I was able to
Well,
see.
and it turns out I just read this that she was fired from I'll Find You
Oh,
at
really?
some point by the production company, and she recruited the assistants of the Directors Guild. Oh, shoot, we forgot to talk about her being the first director of the Directors Guild. That was in
We
2002.
could still talk about it now. We're in the after party.
And she, yeah, she did a lot of advocating for, opportunities for women and people of color to direct. A lot of that, didn't have a lot of results, but we continue to see these challenges. So she recruited the Directors Guild and went into arbitration and did eventually get it back on the project. And a different distribution company purchased it for the rights in North America. So yeah, a lot of problems with that one, which was, it's listed as 2019, but then 22 in the U.S. So it had a long drawn out production.
Right, because it didn't get released until like 4 years after. Yeah, in a way, Martha Coolidge, you look at these years we featured 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. In a way, her career mirrors for independent filmmakers and women in particular kind of the arc of what happened to filmmakers. 70s, you had the auteur era where you could make interesting, gritty films and actually get them released, even just to a small audience. But it's hard to see something like Not a Pretty Picture getting made in the 80s. 80s, you've got the explosion of Hollywood films that are fairly exploitive of women and the teen comedy rising, and so her career follows that, with Valley Girl and Real Genius, which at least is not as exploitive as Valley Girl, but has, those teen comedy elements. 90s independent cinema and auteurism comes back a little bit again, so she's able to get something like Rambling Rose out. It's not successful though, financially, which then hurts her career, makes it harder for her to get movies. And then you have her in the 2000s, basically just scrambling to get anything made and having to go over to Europe to get something made. So, which is also very much like the trajectory of auteurs. So it's very interesting from that perspective that her career, like if you thought, like there's so many directors in the 70s, Coppola himself being one of them, Robert Altman being another, who found themselves basically lost at sea in the 80s. They couldn't find, no one would finance their movies because everyone wanted Spielberg stuff or Die Hard type movies. They wanted action, they wanted
Yeah.
comedy, they wanted spectacle. Those auteuristic, serious movies of the 70s were not in vogue anymore. So it's very interesting.
I guess I didn't get a chance to mention a couple of the other ones. Plain Clothes, that was 88. George Wendt is the bad guy, so that's kind of weird. But it also has a bunch of known actors in it. If These Walls Could Talk, that was a TV movie, but
Hmm.
actually has a lesbian relationship, so that
That one
one,
I remember. I actually remember that was pretty well known. I think it won like some Emmys,
yeah.
some TV awards. Yeah.
Flamingo Rising and Ponder Heart are both TV things. The Prince and Me, this is Julia Stiles, like in a Dutch Prince or something. 12 Days of Christmas, Steven Weber in a TV movie. Material Girls, the Duff Sisters. This is kind of a weird Pride and Prejudice kind of play, but enjoyable, I think. Another TV American Girl, Carissa Stand Strong, kind of a after school special tribute. This is sort of a horror mystery kind of thing. But yeah, I think she just kept working at things, sometimes not big productions, sometimes TV. She did direct a bunch of TV, although a lot of those were kind of just one episode here. I did see some Twilight Zone, 80s Twilight Zone that she
Yeah, she
directed.
did a lot of TV. I looked up her up on IMDb this morning, like one episode of Weeds, one episode
But
of this,
but
like yeah.
just one episode, yeah, most times, except for a few exceptions.
But
And
introducing Dorothy Dandridge is a fine. I mean, that's a really acclaimed TV movie, and as is If These Walls Could Talk. So she was able to do some more auteuristic things on TV occasionally.
yeah, and I guess I didn't get to talk about some of the collaborators. I mentioned Frederick Forrest and Colleen Camp. She did a bunch of, especially the 80s kind of movies. Brent Spiner did half a dozen or so of these. He was in, this is Data from Star Trek. He was
Hmm.
in Dorothy Dandridge. He was in Out to Sea. Mostly he's kind of hamming it up in these weird characters with accents. But the one that stuck out to me, well, too, Michelle Miernick, she plays the kind of love interest in Real Genius, but she did a bunch of like nerd comedies in the 80s and then quit acting. Um, but Joanne Barron, who is a familiar face but plays little tiny parts in about 15 Martha Coolidge movies,
Hmm.
they actually went through acting school together, and she's still acting and teaching, but she has all these little parts throughout there. She was one of the prom teachers in the prom scene of Valley Girl. So she
Oh,
oftentimes
okay.
is playing a teacher. You'd recognize her. She has kind of a funny looking nose. But anyways, I
Was she
enjoyed.
in Not a Pretty Picture at all, or no?
No, I think their collaboration was probably after that. But
Oh,
I
okay.
think,
Because I did think it was interesting. I didn't know till after I watched the movie and I watched the interview. I don't know if you watched that interview with her and
her,
Allison
her
Anders on
roommate.
Criterion. Yeah, the roommate. I thought that was amazing. I did think when I was watching it, I'm like, this gal looks a lot older than these other kids. And then I was like, oh, but that's because she's actually Martha Coolidge's age. But it
Yeah,
was so interesting that she had her real life roommate play the roommate in the movie. And even though there's the age difference, which makes it unrealistic. There's nothing really realistic about the movie anyway, because it looks like an acting exercise. So I don't think it didn't bother me, and I found it very interesting when she talked about like the way you viewed me as like a clown, and I was going through my own issues at the time. And I just wanted to be there for you and support you. So in a way, it was like cathartic for her to get to act out these things again.
yeah,
Because
that
I
was
don't think
super.
she, yeah.
That was super interesting, and I think I got a lot of insight listening to her interviews about the movies that she had done. And it's as you mentioned, it's really insightful as far as the layers and depth of struggle that all of the female characters were going through. And sometimes I can just gloss over that when I'm viewing it, but upon repeat viewings, it definitely gives it a lot more context. Um, so it's certainly interesting that she has that perspective, and trying to infuse these more significant messages into things that even maybe aren't at first glance, so important.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Jason, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. That was fun and fairly educational for me. I had not heard about Not a Pretty Picture. It was interesting because when I looked it up on Criterion, I'm like, oh, there's like a whole package of stuff with this. So I started watching the extras. I haven't watched the documentary yet, but I put it on my list, Old Fashioned Woman, the one about her grandma, because that looked kind of fun. I wanted to
Yeah,
check that
that was
out.
definitely cool. One interview that I had seen, but then yesterday when I was looking for it, it's no longer available. But apparently, it's on the Blu-ray for Valley Girl. But Nicolas Cage and Martha Coolidge sit down in the Viper Room where they filmed those, and it's like 20 or 30, 25 years later or something, and have this little remembrance. And so, if you have a chance to view, that's one of the memorable interviews that I saw.
And where did you find that?
Well, I had found it on YouTube, but then when I went to try and find it again, I still had the window up, and it said this video is no longer available. So I don't know if there was a permission thing or something. But apparently, it was an extra, maybe on a Blu-ray or something. So you might have to acquire a Blu-ray. How did you watch Valley Girl?
I think I rented it on. I think it was on demand on
Uh,
Amazon or something. Pretty sure. Yeah, I think I rented it.
yeah,
It
because
was like three
weirdly,
bucks or something. So
that one wasn't in the library system. A lot of the older ones I was able to find in the library, or they're just free online, but that one wasn't. I was totally unaware. A few years ago, they actually remade Valley Girl as a musical, but
oh, did they?
Mar-
I didn't know that either.
Martha Coolidge didn't have anything to do with it. So that one was
Probably
at the
best for
library,
her.
but the original was not at the library.
That's funny. Well, that's I guess that's good, right? But yeah, it's interesting. It's hard to find because it was such a big hit. But some of those '80s movies can be.
I
Like
think
when I was
again,
trying to find um, Real Genius for the show, I had a hard time finding it on streaming too.
I
So
think sometimes those music things are complicated. Like maybe they get rights to the music, but they can't clear, or the movie, but they can't clear all of the music. I heard one version. So this is Mirnik, who plays the in Real Genius, the girl. She also plays a super nerdy girl in Revenge of the Nerds, and that was more of a raunch comedy. But apparently, that one has thriller in it, and even though it's just a short little segment, that complicates the distribution. Like a lot of times, they'll have to replace that music with something else so that the
Mm.
music can show. So it's just this the birth of that era of music rights, and whereas it used to be you could just put whatever movie or music you wanted in your
Which is
movie.
not great for the musicians. So I have
Yeah.
to say, like, they need to get paid for their work. So you can't just like
It's
steal
like a lot
people's
of great
music.
music. One thing that I thought was noteworthy in Pretty Picture, that was original music. Like they had a friend who did the song to make it sound like
No, I
that.
saw that in the extras, and I thought they did a really good job. Like, I actually liked it better than the other thing is it didn't take you out of the movie because if they put like a really famous song from that early '60s, like the Shirelles or something, like, Will You Still Love Me? Like a song you're immediately like, oh yeah, I know, but it like gave that feeling in the early '60s without being like really specific to an actual thing you've seen before or felt. So I liked that because when I heard the music, I thought, oh, and this sounds like it sounds like the early '60s, but I've never heard this song before, and I'm pretty familiar with that era because that's the music my parents listened to. And so, and then sure enough, they had someone write, and it really written well. That's the way to do it. Just do your
Yeah,
original music. So
yeah. Just
then
write
you don't,
great original music. That's all.
yeah, then you don't have to worry about the rights. Just have someone write it, for the movie. So anyway, we'll wrap up the after party now. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you, Angela. Bye bye.